I'm Tania Rogers, and you're listening to Mindful Hustler, the podcast helping entrepreneurs get out of their heads and onto building their dreams. Together, we're building businesses while balancing minds. Let's dive in.
Let's talk about what happens when you blend clarity, confidence, and cultural truth into a brand. In this impactful episode, we get to sit down with Dr. Ijeoma, a powerhouse brand strategist and coach for bold, minority owned businesses. She's the mind behind Dr. Ijeoma Co, where she helps ambitious founders discover their true brand voice, build authentic content, and turn their vision into visibility for growth. We talk about what it really means to show up in your full voice, how to go from blending in to boldly standing out, and why minority owned brands must lead with both strategy and soul. Whether you're building a business, struggling to find your message, or feeling called to expand your impact, this conversation is for you. Dr. Ijoma, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited to talk to you, and I'm excited for everyone to listen in on what we're going to be talking about today.
I'm so excited for this. I know we've known each other for so many years now, and we share so many mutual friends.
Yes,
But we've never really connected one on one. So it's going to be really fun to sit down with you one on one and talk about what you're doing. I love what you're doing.
absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that because it's definitely a journey I just got started on. So to get this feedback, it means a lot. It really does.
I want to start from the beginning. How did your journey into brand strategy begin, and what called you into this space?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the most defining moments in my journey, especially recently, and honestly, the one that pushed me into this work full time was I was laid off from my six-figure job while on maternity leave with my second child. Yeah,
Really? I didn't
that
know that.
moment,
Wow.
that moment, it rocked me. So I done everything right, right? I've led these campaigns, I've managed teams, I climbed the ladder. I checked off all the boxes, yet during a time when I should have been supported the most, I was suddenly unemployed with a newborn in one hand and a toddler in the other. And that can rock anyone to their core, but honestly, for me, instead of just rushing to find another job just to feel safe, because that's the easiest way to do it, right? I took a pause. I took a moment just to catch my breath and tell myself or ask myself, what do I really want? What does the next 5 years, the next 10 years look like, especially with young kids? And that's really where Dr. Njama & Co. was born. I took everything I've learned in corporate and in startups, especially the many times I've been the only woman in a startup. And I
Oh.
created and built this brand that felt a little bit more aligned and more impactful and more mine. And I think ownership as a woman is so powerful in this day. I realized I didn't just want to be a part of someone else's vision anymore, whether it was me being a part of a startup or me working in corporate. I wanted to lead one because you know what? I'm a boss, baby.
That's right. That's right. I love that. I love that. And so what were you doing when you got laid off? What kind of role did you have?
Yeah, I was an associate director working up to the VP role, or I had a plan to work up to the VP role, working in advertising, specifically marketing. And I was leading across these multi-million dollar brands. But, as great as the pay was, it wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't
Mm.
something I can look back on and say I was genuinely happy with what I did because for me, it just wasn't purpose driven versus what I'm doing now, it's so fulfilling. And that for me is key and key to my happiness, honestly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so big into impactful entrepreneurship, and it's not just about making money. Of course, money
Yep,
is important,
absolutely.
but what's lasting and what really helps us continue really legacy and sharing our gifts is really leading with your big why.
Yes.
Mm,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, and people can feel that too. People
Oh,
can
yeah.
tell, right? Like your clients and everyone you work with. Yeah.
Absolutely. Even like the clients I I'm working with now, they feel this sense of like peace and ease when talking to me. There's not this sense of urgency and rush. And I think that comes naturally when you're, fulfilling your destiny, when you're doing something that feels calming to your soul. You become this version of yourself that you're truly proud of. And I'm happy to be doing this, honestly.
So you went from climbing the corporate ladder and checking the boxes to chasing your dreams. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know you have a PhD in the field. What did you study in school?
Yeah, so I have a BA, a Bachelor's of Arts. Oh my god, it feels like ages ago at this point.
I know, I know. I don't want to date us. I don't
I
want to date
know.
us.
I even said a BA when it should be a BS. I have a BS in business
Mhm.
marketing. I have an MA in marketing, and then I have a PhD in communication with specializing in advertising. And usually, what I tell people about my PhD, especially because I'm not a professor, I'm not in academia, is my PhD allows me to think a little bit more deeply about how people think. It's not necessarily like I'm coming in as this know all, be all, end of all of everything. It's just I have a different viewpoint of things, right? My background in research allows me to think a little bit more critically, a little bit more analytically. And I love that for myself, but I love it even more for my clients because I'm providing a different perspective that they will never get from anyone else. And that in itself is refreshing.
So when did you realize that voice and messaging were the missing links for so many minority-owned brands?
Oh yeah. So I think for me it became a little bit more clear when I left corporate and started consulting, right? I've met, Black women founders with incredible ideas and deep stories and powerful missions. But when I read their website or I heard their pitch, it sounded off. It didn't sound like
Mhm.
them. It sounded like what they thought they should say, to be taken more seriously. And I think that's an issue because we make ourselves more palatable for others instead of being our authentic self, right? And that's what opened my eyes. Our brilliance isn't the issue. Our voice was getting lost in some way. And I understood that loss on a deep level. Being laid off, having kids, I had to find my voice again, because you become a mom, a wife, but what else, right? And so it wasn't just for me personally, but also professionally. So now I help other women do the same, reclaiming their voice, owning their story, building a brand that reflects their truth, not just this title or this expectation that someone else has of them.
Yeah. You and I do, it's funny, do very similar work, but in totally different fields.
I
So
spot
yeah,
on.
I'm a psychotherapist and after since starting my business, what I found was exactly what you're saying. It was so difficult for me and even now I
Mm,
struggle with it and I'm doing, startup incubators and things like that to help with it, but like it's very difficult yeah, it's very difficult though because it's like you said, you try to make yourself so palpable,
mhm.
almost like you strip your voice away
You shrank.
and yeah, and what I realized about myself, like say 5 years ago, is that there were a lot of like deep psychological conditionings and blocks
Mm,
from
mm,
childhood
mm.
that made me struggle with that. So like fear of being seen as the authority figure, fear of being judged. And so I'm just going to stay safe and small and not really put a lot out. So it's so difficult. So what you're doing is so impactful. I love it.
I know our listeners can't see me, but I'm literally like clicking my middle finger and thumb because we're spelling tea right now. Like that is
Yeah.
so spot on.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of people struggle with it, and what really actually inspired this podcast, a lot of it was after talking to a lot of my clients who wanted to be entrepreneurs, and I love working with women, so, I call them like my future female founders. They struggled with that, and as a result, they don't launch and put themselves out there. It's because everything that you're talking about, they
Yep.
struggle with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Again, that fear, but we have to find a way to push through, because fear will only hold you back, especially from being the best version of yourself.
I always like to say You can build the plane as you fly. Like what held me
You.
back, I have a perfectionism complex where it's like, and that just comes from fear of being judged, really. I never really thought of myself as a perfectionist because that sounds like someone who has their shit together and does things perfectly,
Yep.
and that's not me.
Right.
But after really doing some deep dive on my own mind, I'm like, no, there's a perfectionist complex in there.
There is.
Even if it doesn't look perfect,
Mhm.
I struggle with putting it out there until I think it's perfect. And so now my
Yeah.
mantra is just put it out there. Like it's not for you to judge, it's for other people. Share your gifts.
Absolutely. There's a little quote I live by right now. It's better to be present than perfect. You
Yes.
figure it out along the way. Just show
Yes.
up. It may be messy in the beginning, but it'll only get better. My first post on my social media page, I look back on it and I may cringe now because the ones I'm doing now are a little bit more, improved and better quality. But I needed to start somewhere, right? So, and that's so important. You have to start, even if it's messy.
Absolutely, and I always like to tell people to expect it to be messy and be okay with
Mhm.
that, right? And,
Yeah.
like, be comfortable with looking stupid or thinking that you look stupid. You just like, that's what happens when you start new ventures. You're always gonna start from the bottom. You're always gonna have to be figuring it out, so get comfortable with that, especially if you wanna be an entrepreneur, that's the name of the game.
That is the name of the game. You got that. You definitely got that.
Yeah. So what would you say are some things that get in the way of minority-owned businesses finding their brand voice?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what we just spoke about right now. So many of us have taught ourselves that, making ourselves smaller to survive, don't speak too loudly, don't stand out too much, don't ruffle any feathers. That conditioning doesn't just disappear when you become a business owner. It shows up in everything you do, especially your branding, especially your voice, especially the messaging you put out there. Add to the trauma of being a mother, going through postpartum, and showing up professionally. Yeah, that's a lot. I had to unlearn a lot of that when I launched
Yep.
my business. But now I walk with my clients, I walk them through that same process of shedding and softening and stepping into their real voice because it takes those stripping of those layers to find this new version, this better version of yourself. So it's really important for us to find our voice because in finding our voice, we find ourselves, right?
I always like to suggest reparenting that inner child that feels like
No.
they wanna hide, that they don't wanna
Yeah,
be seen. I do a lot of journaling work with clients and whatever they're feeling that's blocking them from doing whatever they're trying to do, whether it's launching, whether it's scaling or whatever, give yourself that advice from a parent or an authority figure's perspective, like reparenting that inner child.
yeah.
So for me, I have a bunch of like little sticky notes. Even it helps me. I'm such a like introverted creator. It's so funny. But I have little reminders like, what is the
So cute.
message? Wait, I have a good one. Let's see. Wait. Okay. This one says, you have to share the gifts abundantly in order to
Mm,
receive gifts abundantly.
mm,
Don't don't back up the system. So for me, it's like you receive and you're
mhm.
supposed to give. If you don't
Yes,
give, you're backing the system up.
yes. In my world, I call it as closed mouths don't convert,
I love that.
speak
Yes.
up, tell your story, share. Like you said, you have to give to receive. And in giving, especially when you're in marketing and advertising, you have to tell a story. What story are you telling? Especially about yourself, and you always want to be your authentic self. I get that. But sometimes authenticity isn't perfect. It's a little bit messy, it's a little bit chaotic. And I think in today's day and time, especially when you look at social media, people love the chaos. People love the
Mhm. That's
you
true.
it sounds crazy, but you see a lot of these influencers and big names kind of making it big because they're telling every aspect and parts of their life. So I think that's so
Yeah.
important. That's so, so important in today's time.
Yeah. So how do you guide clients from being stuck to clarity?
So I think it starts from just understanding what their goals are, what they want to accomplish. And it's not just goals as far as your business, it's goals as an individual, right? I always tell my clients when I have the first discovery call, I'm not just gonna help you achieve your goals, I'm gonna care for you as an individual. Because
Mm,
as a small business owner, what you have to understand when working with these types of clients and individuals that the personal and the professional, it mixes. You can't separate the two because, as you know, as a business owner, even if you're not doing physical work for your business, you're thinking about it all the time. You
I
wake up
know.
in the middle of the night thinking of your to-do list for the next day. It takes a toll on your soul and your body, you know what I mean? So in me understanding this individual as a whole and also understanding their goal to achieve as a business, I'm better able to guide them. I'm better able to provide a plan, a marketing strategy, a roadmap, a blueprint that gives them ease, that gives them peace, that gives them an understanding of what they're trying to achieve. So again, it may be a little bit messy when we're going through it, but at the end of it, you come out refreshed, like, okay, that was clarity. That was the understanding I needed to get to the next level. And that for me is so important to lay that foundation at the very beginning with any client that I work with.
What do you think people misunderstand about strategy, especially for those of us who come from the healing and creative professions?
I think it will take the soul out of the business, right? But I always say strategy honors your soul by giving it structure. It helps your gifts reach more people. As a strategist, as a woman who's had to rebuild from, painful career experiences, I know how tempting it is to just wing it. And winging it is the worst thing you could do. Clarity gives you peace. I'm going to say that again. Clarity gives you peace. When you know what you're doing, who you're talking to, and how to help them, you move more confidently. You move more, with understanding, and that in itself is power. So I think it's so important to have that structure, even if it's a little bit, disjointed or it takes longer than you want. That structure in the long run, you look back in it and thank your stars and say, "Oh, I'm so happy I did that." So again, it's so important to have that.
What would you say to someone who has the passion but is scared to be visible?
Okay. So for this one, I would say you don't have to be fearless. You don't have to have it figured all out. You just have to be faithful and consistent in your purpose. There's so many moments where I wanted to shrink or be this other version of myself, where I felt tired, embarrassed, just scared to show up. But I just kept reminding myself this isn't just about me. There's somebody waiting to be encouraged by my presence. Even if I start a little bit, even if I start small, it's okay. Just start.
Yes, the start stops a lot of people. And
Mm.
it's funny, one of my post-its over here.
Oh, these are posts I'm loving. Like, I'm loving it.
So funny,
What's this
so
one
cringy,
say?
but I love it.
No, it's not.
Says
It's not cringy.
it says the longer you wait, the longer people suffer. Just to your point.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Your genius, your wisdom, everything you have to offer in this world, someone is literally waiting for that. But instead, you're just gatekeeping. Why? Why are you doing that?
So how do you personally balance structure and soul in your own brand? Because I know for me, sometimes I can struggle with this. I think I've gotten a lot better over the years where like I now know I need structure. To run any business, you need structure, you need strategies, you need systems.
Yeah.
But I am a free spirit, and I'm learning that structure doesn't have to look, the way that you think sometimes. You could have
Yeah.
flexibility within the structure, but you need your core structure. So how do you balance that personally?
And I love how you said it, even being a free spirit, you still understand the importance of structure. In anything you do, regardless of what you want to pursue, whether personal or professional, you always need some sort of structure. For me, I built systems for my soul, right? So I've got workflows and templates and process, but I also have certain boundaries because I gotta take care of the baby naps. I still want the baby snuggles. I still have kids that I need to
Mm,
attend. That balance is so important. So again, having that structure allows me to be present for both without overextending myself. When I ended my previous role, I had to redefine success for myself. It wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It was about being present. So now if it doesn't align with my values and what gives me peace, it's a no. I'm not doing it. My business is efficient and deeply, that's how I sustain both growth
mhm.
and grace. So yeah, that's usually how I have my structures in place to help me out.
Love that. Deeply human, because
Yes.
one of the reasons why I left corporate is because corporate can feel very distant, very cold, like systems built on top of systems built on top of
Mm,
systems. You know, you call and you get put on hold and put to someone else. And it just feels soulless sometimes. And I love
yeah,
that you put
it
it
is.
that way, deeply human.
Yes. And you said it right because that was my experience working in corporate, working in agencies. You lose that human touch. Everything is now about the bottom line. How can we make the profit at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year? You take away from the human touch. Like I said to you at the very beginning, even just being laid off when I was at the most vulnerable should have said to me was very clear that there was no human side to these people. There was no human side to this entity. And I needed to reclaim that. And by doing that, I started my business.
Yeah. Take me back to that. What was it like for you when you were laid off, and what was the timeline between that and like you starting your business? What was going through your head? Did you launch right
Yeah.
away? How did that come
You
about?
know, I've been thinking about this business for a very long time. I've been in advertising and marketing for over 15 years now, and it's something I've always done on the side. I've helped friends and family with business ideas, marketing plans, and I've done it freely, but I knew there was a possibility that I can capitalize on this. But when you're making good money from corporate, it's hard to walk away from that. And as you
Yeah.
enter into this world of being married and being a mom and having kids that have all these needs and requirements, you want to make sure you have that steady stream of income coming in. So it was a safety net. It was a sense of feeling okay that there was that steady income coming in. But was I truly happy with what I was doing? No. So when that layoff happened, it was the shakeup I needed. I was talking to a girlfriend of mine earlier today, and she continues to remind me with every conversation that we have that God puts you in uncomfortable situations so you can propel to this
Yeah.
new version, this better version of yourself. And I again try to remind myself when I'm having mini panic attacks about whether this business is going to do well or not, right? But I think that's so important to remember because I didn't want to go back to losing myself like I was working in corporate. I wanted to feel fulfilled in what I was doing. And for me, fulfillment means making other people happy, means allowing people to reach their goal, means assisting in whatever way I can for them to achieve everything that they can. I'm a big sister. I'm the oldest of five. I'm used to helping out, being the third parent. And I know these day and time there's a lot of trauma associated with being the first daughter and all of that. But for me, I see that as an advantage to some degree. If you know that you get fulfillment with helping others, find a way to monetize that. If you know that you find fulfillment in giving back, in doing for others so they can succeed, find a way to monetize that. And for me, it's leveraging my talents, my natural talents as a strategist, as someone who knows marketing, as someone who has experience working in a corporate setting, as someone who has experience working in a startup. How did I merge and marry all that? I did it and I started Dr. Ijeoma Co. So yeah, it was a traumatic situation, but I look back on it, it was a saving grace as well because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. That push was what I needed to get to this moment.
I always tell people who are interested in like starting a business or starting a brand, when you start your business or your brand, you can do whatever you want with it. Like if you do want to
Mhm.
have a corporate client, you can have a corporate client, right? Like you don't have to only do one to one. You can do B2B and you can be a contractor to a corporate company, right? So there's so many different avenues, but the point is that it's on your terms. So now you
Yes,
have a business that you're negotiating with another business and you're no longer this employee that has all of these rules that they have to follow, and if you get let go, now you're just, you have nothing. Like
yes,
you have your own table.
absolutely, absolutely. You said it perfectly, and that's exactly what I have and what I feel, and I'll continue to, nurture it and grow it to the best of my capabilities.
Absolutely, I love that. So last question, I ask all of our guests this: what does
Mhm.
hustle mindfully mean to you?
Hustle mindfully means I get to live on my own terms, right? And I think we kind of said it throughout this session at some point. I get to do whatever I want to do because I can. I get to live freely. I get to work today and rest tomorrow. I get to, hang with my babies, but spend 2 hours on a strategy call the next minute. But I kind of want to take it back a little bit because, like, I think it's so important to understand that everything that you do doesn't always guarantee safety, especially when you're still trying to figure out whether you should experience or get into entrepreneurship, right? And also understanding that over delivering also doesn't protect you. And that's
Mm,
why it's so important to have that balance, right? Mindful hustler, right? If you're overextending in one capacity, you're under delivering in the other. Like if I'm giving my all to work, I'm not being the best mom that I want to be. Whereas
very
like
true.
in this new, stage I'm at, I control all of that, right? Today I said, I'm just going to focus on the podcast that I'm going to have with you. I'm going to have my adult time, my girl time with this session. And then this evening, me and my girl are going to cuddle up and watch YouTube and just enjoy some popcorn. And that for me is balance, right?
Yeah.
I get to work a little bit and then reward myself a little bit. And that's the balance that is so important for everybody to have, especially the moms, especially the hustlers, especially the entrepreneurs out here.
Yes.
Rest should not be a reward, it's a necessity. You have to
Yeah.
rest so you can show up as the best version of yourself.
Yes, yes. And actually, wait, hold on. Not last question because I really want to
Now,
ask. I just want to hold you a little bit longer.
you got me, girl. You got me.
What are some things you had to unlearn going from working in corporate to now owning a business?
Had to Ooh, that's a good one. I had to unlearn a lot, right? I think for me, I'm so used to structure from someone else, right? I think we talked
Yeah.
about structure earlier, but structure on our own terms versus structure from someone else. Where, for instance, I'll put together these $1 million plans, but then I needed to have someone oversee it, and whoever would oversee it will butcher it. There will be feedback, there will be this, there will be that, and that chips away at your confidence. That chips away
Mm,
at you little by little. And you don't even realize that until you step away from that situation. It's almost like being in a toxic relationship. You don't realize how toxic it was until
mm,
you're out of it. And you're just like, what the heck was I going through? How could I allow myself to be in that situation? And I'm not saying this to, encourage people to just leave their jobs and become entrepreneurs. No, there are wonderful jobs out there, but I think for me, it was so important to recognize that so I can realize that I needed to unlearn certain things to be a better version of myself. I had to shatter this illusion that I was living in a little bit. As painful as it was, it freed me. As hurtful as the moment was, it made me a better version of myself to be a better consultant to my clients, to be a better mother, to be a better wife. I also had to unlearn perfectionism, like we were saying earlier. We want to have the best before we put it out. I also had to unlearn productivity as an identity. My gosh, like that has so many layers to it because there was a constant pressure to prove, right? You
Yeah.
have to prove that you're worthy of this job, of this role, or you're worthy of whatever role that you're trying to work into. Even like on social media these days, you have to prove that you're being such a wonderful mom and you're being a perfect wife. Cut the shit, please.
Right.
Like,
Right.
nobody is perfect. Nothing is wonderful out here. It's
Yeah.
messy. It's
Yeah.
just, it's muddy, but as we know this, we have to talk about it more. We have to express that, and in doing that and speaking about that, you're already unlearning, and saying these things and vocalizing it, you're already becoming this better version of yourself. So ultimately,
Yeah.
now I move differently, right?
Yeah.
Right now, I lead with integrity, not anxiety, even though I do have anxious days. I'm not going to lie.
Mhm. Mhm.
But
Of
I
course. Yeah.
also trust myself more. It's not just about having this check-in with someone. I ask myself, how do I feel about this? Does this make me happy? Am I proud of myself? Is this my best work? Is this the best I can do? And if I answer yes for all of them, I'm going to put it out. I'm going to do it. And I teach my clients the exact same thing.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Where can people find you?
You guys can find me on Instagram at Dr. Ijeoma and Co. And I'm sure you'll probably tag handles
Yep.
and definitely tag the page so my followers and yours can see. But you can also find me at drejamaandco.com. If you're looking to work with me, you can reach me on both the website as well as my social media. For me, I love what I do because I get to work with some amazing women out there. And if you're looking for someone who understands both the business side of growing, but also the personal side that merges with that business, I'm your girl. I'm the person you should be working with.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. I know we're going to
Of
speak again.
course.
I want to have you back on because I feel like we can talk forever, even just about like
Yes,
mompreneur life and just
I love
all of
that.
that.
Yes,
So
I'm
you will be
here.
back on very shortly for sure.
Thank you, thank you. I am more than happy to come back. It felt short. I'm sure it's probably been over an hour at this point, but it felt like it was like 10 minutes we were just chatting. So I
We
love
can
this
chat
conversation.
away.
And I also want to say this, you are doing amazing with this. I've been trying
Thank
my
you.
best to, just listen to every episode. I've only
Aw.
caught a couple of them, but I'm sure you understand why, but I have been making it a point to check in and catch these episodes, especially on my walks with my family. And I just
Mm.
want to say the way you lead, especially with care, especially with grace, I see that because you've transformed into this beautiful woman, this beautiful entrepreneur, this beautiful mother, and it's reflected in what you're doing. So I just wanted to give you that shout out as well.
I received that on so many levels. Thank you. Thank you so much because it is not
Of
easy,
course.
especially when,
It's not.
you're not social media can be a scary place. But, I know I have so much knowledge in my field and
You
I've run
do.
into so many people who struggle with things that I've struggled with in the past and still to this day navigate. So like we said in the beginning, I'm just leading by my message, and I
You're
appreciate that
brilliant.
you can see that transformation, and I'm
I
honored. Thank
do.
you.
I do.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode and you don't want to miss another, make sure you subscribe. See you next time.